I rushed to the hospital near midnight after my son-in-law called and said my daughter had fallen down the stairs. Minutes later, a doctor placed a medical file in my hands and quietly said, "Your daughter didn't fall." 36 injuries, some fresh, some months old. My legs nearly gave out. When I demanded justice, a detective only lowered his voice and said, "Their family controls this entire county. No one dares touch them." I closed the file, looked at my unconscious daughter, and made myself a promise if the law couldn't make them pay. I would. If you've made it this far, thank you. That means more than you know. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining? From today I read every single one. This story weaves fictional elements into its narrative for depth and purpose. Names and settings are not drawn from any specific real source, but the lessons inside are ones I believe you'll recognize. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept it on the table anyway. That was a habit I couldn't shake even 5 years on. Dorothy had always taken the second cup. Every morning for 31 years, I made 2. These days I still made 2, drank one and left the other, sitting there on the kitchen table, until it turned cold and the surface filmed over with a thin gray skin. My daughter Sarah told me once during one of her Sunday visits that it was the saddest thing she had ever seen. I told her it was just coffee. We both knew I was lying. It was the 11th of November, a Tuesday, and the rain had been falling since late afternoon in the long straight sheets that Georgia throws down in autumn, like it means to wash the county clean. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a case file from 1987, an old audit I had pulled from the box in the garage for no reason I could name, just to have something my hands could do. Outside, the rain hit the kitchen window in waves. The oak tree in the backyard bent and recovered, the way old things do when the weather gets serious. I was 60 years old, retired 4 years. I had spent 35 of those years as a state auditor for Georgia, which meant I had spent 35 years in rooms where people lied to me with their mouths while their numbers told the truth. I was good at reading numbers. I was considerably less good at most other things. The phone rang at 11:14. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the microwave when the sound cut through the kitchen, the way a loud noise always makes you reach for something solid. 11:14, the rain, the cold coffee, the oak tree bending in the dark. The number on the screen was Caleb's. I had never liked Caleb Thornton. I want to be honest about that from the start because what came later might make it seem like dislike was the whole story, and it wasn't. Sarah loved him, or believed she did, and for 3 years I had told myself that a father's instinct is not the same as evidence. I had told myself that the unease I felt watching him put his hand on the small of my daughter's back at family dinners was just the ordinary jealousy of a man who had raised a child alone and didn't know how to share her. I had told myself a lot of things. I answered on the second ring. "Arthur?" His voice was flat, not the flatness of a man in shock, the flatness of a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was now saying it. "Sarah had an accident. You should come to Cypress General." My hand tightened around the phone so hard that my knuckles popped one after another like small gunshots in the quiet kitchen. My chest pulled inward the way it had on the morning. Dorothy sat down at the breakfast table and said the light looked strange. That sudden, terrible knowing, before the knowing is confirmed. "What kind of accident?" I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "She fell," Caleb said. "She's going to be fine, but you should come." He hung up before I could ask another question. I stood in the kitchen for 11 seconds. I counted them the way I had trained myself to count in situations that wanted me to run. 11 seconds of standing still, breathing, letting the first wave of fear crash through and recede before I moved. Then I put on my coat, checked the lock on the back door, twice the way I always do, picked up my keys and walked out into the rain. The drive to Cypress General took 19 minutes on a dry night. I made it in 14, and I don't remember most of it. I remember the windshield wipers beating their rhythm, and I remember thinking about the morning I had brought Sarah home from this same hospital 32 years ago, 5 pounds 11 ounces wrapped in a yellow blanket, her eyes screwed shut against the light. I remembered thinking that she was the smallest thing I had ever been responsible for, and that I had no idea how to keep something that small safe in a world that was built to break things. I parked crooked in the visitor lot and didn't fix it. The emergency entrance at Cypress General smelled the way all hospitals smell at night, antiseptic and warm plastic, and something underneath that has no name but that you recognize immediately and that your body understands as a warning. A nurse at the front desk started to ask me something as I came through the sliding doors, water dripping from my coat, onto the linoleum, and I said 3 words before she could finish her sentence. "I'm her father." Something in the way I said it made her stop. She picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, and then pointed me down the corridor without asking for my name, or my insurance card, or any of the ordinary bureaucratic friction that hospitals use to slow a person down. I was grateful for that. I was not sure in that moment that I could have answered questions. The hallway was long and fluorescent and very white. A janitor pushed a cart past me, wheels squeaking against the floor. Two residents in scrubs walked the other direction, talking in low voices about someone's potassium levels. Ordinary Tuesday night business. The world going on the way it does, indifferent to the particular terror of any one man walking down any one corridor. I was halfway down when a door opened on my left and Dr. Catherine Mercer stepped out. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back and the particular stillness of someone who delivered bad news for a living and had learned that stillness was a kindness. She was carrying a large manila envelope, the kind that holds imaging films, and she was not smiling. She had the look of a person who had been waiting for me to arrive and had spent that waiting time deciding exactly how she was going to say what she had to say. She looked at me for a moment, taking me in, assessing the way a doctor does when they are calibrating how much a person can hold, and then she said in a voice that was careful and quiet and did not offer me any false comfort at the edges, "Mr. Morgan, I need you to see something." My heart dropped straight through the floor of my chest. My throat locked up so completely that I had to swallow twice before I could make my voice work, and when it came out, it scraped against something raw on the way up. "Show me," I said. She led me past 3 closed doors and a nurse's station where someone was talking quietly into a phone, and then she stopped outside a room with a glass panel set into the wall beside the door. She didn't open the door right away. She turned to face me first, and I understood that she was giving me a moment, one last moment, before the moment that would divide my life into before and after. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "I want you to be prepared. What you're about to see is going to be very difficult." "I've seen difficult things," I told her. My voice was steadier than my legs. "I know," she said, "but this is your daughter." She opened the door. The room was cold and white and very quiet except for the soft mechanical breathing of the monitors. There was a figure in the bed, small under the blankets, wired and braced, and so thoroughly wrapped in the apparatus of serious injury that for 2 full seconds my eyes moved across the bed without landing anywhere, refusing the way eyes sometimes refuse things they already know are true. Then they landed. My knees buckled. Not metaphorically, literally, physically buckled the way a structure buckles when the load exceeds what it was built to carry. I caught myself on the doorframe with both hands, my fingers white against the metal, and I made a sound that started somewhere below my sternum and came out of my mouth as something I had no name for. Not a word. Not quite a cry. Something older than either. The face in the bed was swollen on the left side, a deep, ugly yellow-green that spoke of bruising days old. There was a shave patch on her scalp with a row of small dark stitches running through it. Both forearms were wrapped in white bandaging. Her right leg was elevated in a soft brace. A thin tube ran from her wrist to a bag of clear fluid hanging from a chrome pole beside the bed. It was Sarah, my Sarah, the girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter eating cereal straight from the box while I reviewed audit reports at the table. The girl who had called me crying at 2 a.m. during her first week of college because her roommate played music too loud and she didn't know how to ask her to stop. The girl who had held my hand at Dorothy's funeral and said, "Dad, I've got you," when it should have been the other way around. "Come in," Dr. Mercer said from behind me, her voice gentle. "Come in and sit down." I made myself let go of the doorframe. I made myself walk the 8 steps to the chair beside the bed. I sat down, reached out and laid my hand over Sarah's hand, so lightly, so carefully, because every instinct I had was screaming that she was fragile, that one wrong move would shatter something already broken. Her skin was warm. She was breathing. She was alive. I held on to those 2 facts with everything I had. Dr. Mercer pulled a second chair close and sat across from me. She set the manila envelope on the bed tray, opened it, and drew out a series of imaging films, large, semi-transparent sheets that she held up one by one against the light from the window. "I need to walk you through these," she said, "and I need you to hear everything I say before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. The word came out cracked down the middle like old wood. She pointed to the first film. "These are Sarah's ribs. You can see the healing fracture here and here. These are not new injuries, Mr. Morgan. Based on the calcification pattern, these fractures occurred somewhere between 4 and 6 months ago." She moved to the second film. "This is her left forearm. There is a hairline fracture here that is approximately 8 weeks old. And this," she moved to the third, is a fresh fracture of the right forearm, consistent with the injury pattern of last night. My hand tightened over Sarah's until I felt my own fingers trembling. How many? I said. Dr. Mercer took a breath. In total, we have documented 36 distinct injuries across multiple healing stages: fractures, contusions, soft tissue damage. She paused. Mr. Morgan, I have been practicing medicine for 17 years. This is not the result of a fall downstairs. This is a pattern. Someone caused these injuries deliberately, carefully, over a long period of time. The room tilted. I pressed my free hand flat against my knee to stop it from shaking. She fell, I said, because those were the words Caleb had given me, and I needed to hear how they sounded now in this room, in front of these films. No, Dr. Mercer said, and her voice was very firm and very quiet. She did not fall. She set the films down and reached back into the envelope. What she drew out next was not an imaging film. It was a set of color photographs printed on clinical paper, the kind used for documentation. She placed them on the tray in front of me, and I looked at them for a long time without speaking. Sarah's forearms. The bandages had been removed for the photographs. What was visible on the skin underneath made my stomach lurch so violently that I had to press my fist against my mouth. The marks were not random. They were not the chaotic patterning of accident or impact. They were circular, even, spaced with a regularity that spoke of repetition, of patience, of someone who had done this more than once and had not been in any hurry. These burns, Dr. Mercer said carefully, her voice dropping even further, show a geometry consistent with a heated implement applied with deliberate controlled pressure. The spacing and uniformity indicate this was repeated on multiple occasions. My eyes were burning. I was not going to cry in front of Dr. Mercer. I had made that decision somewhere between the parking lot and this chair, and I was holding onto it the way a drowning man holds onto the one thing still floating. Who brought her in? I said. My voice had gone somewhere flat and far away that I recognized. It was the voice I used in audit interviews when I already knew what the numbers said, and I was asking the question anyway to watch the person across the table decide how they were going to handle the truth. Dr. Mercer met my eyes directly. Her husband, she said. He told the intake nurse she fell down the cellar stairs. I looked at my daughter's face. I looked at the swelling and the stitches and the careful, deliberate geometry of what had been done to her arms. I thought about Caleb's voice on the phone, flat prepared, the practiced evenness of a man reciting lines he had rehearsed. Is she going to wake up? I said. She has a mild concussion and some swelling, Dr. Mercer said. We expect her to regain consciousness within the next 24 to 48 hours. The physical injuries are serious, but not life-threatening. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Morgan, I am required to file a report with Adult Protective Services. I've already done that. But I want you to understand something. She stopped, looked at the door, then back at me. There are forces in this county that... She stopped again. Say it, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment, her jaw tight, something working behind her eyes that looked very much like fear and very much like fury at the same time. Be careful, she said finally. Please, be very careful. I stayed with Sarah for 20 minutes after Dr. Mercer left the room. I held my daughter's hand, and I talked to her the way people talk to someone who cannot hear them, quietly, steadily saying things I should have said years ago, and things that didn't need saying, but needed to be said anyway. I told her I was here. I told her she was going to be all right. I told her that her mother would have known exactly what to say in this moment, and that I was doing my best with what I had. My voice broke twice. I let it break, and then I pulled it back together because Sarah needed her father to be standing when she woke up, and that meant I had to start practicing now. At some point, a nurse appeared in the doorway and told me very gently that the family was asking for me in the waiting area. The word family hit me somewhere just below the ribs. I kissed Sarah's forehead, so careful finding one of the few patches of skin that wasn't bruised or taped, and I walked out into the hallway. The family waiting area at Cypress General was a room with plastic chairs and a mounted television playing the Weather Channel with the sound off. Caleb Thornton was sitting in the chair closest to the door, his suit jacket still buttoned, his tie still straight, his thumb moving across his phone screen, unhurried, deliberate, while his wife lay 20 feet away. He looked, I thought, like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Inconvenienced, not destroyed. Not the way a husband looks when his wife is lying 20 feet away with 36 documented injuries and a shaved patch of skull. Standing in the corner near the vending machines was a man I didn't know, heavyset mid-50s wearing a sport coat that had seen better years and carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been on a long shift and knew it wasn't over yet. He had a coffee cup in one hand and a look in his eyes that I recognized immediately. It was the look of a man who already knew what was happening and was trying to decide how much of it he could afford to say out loud. In the far corner, half hidden behind a courtesy rack of outdated magazines, sat Reverend Thomas Okafor. He was a tall man in his 70s, with close-cropped white hair, and the kind of face that has spent decades absorbing other people's grief without flinching. He was watching me from the moment I came through the door, and when our eyes met, something moved across his expression. Recognition or grief, or both. And he started to rise from his chair. Caleb stood up first. Arthur, he crossed the room, with his hand extended, his face arranged into an expression of concern, so polished it looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. Thank God you're here. This has been such an awful night. Sarah is going to be fine. The doctors are very optimistic. Sit down, Caleb, I said. He stopped. His hand was still extended. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not hurt, not surprise, just a rapid recalibration, the way a chess player looks when an opponent makes a move that wasn't in the expected sequence. Arthur, I understand you're upset. Sit down, I said again. He sat. I turned to the man by the vending machines. Are you law enforcement? The man straightened slightly and held up a badge wallet. Detective Ray Miller, Cypress County Sheriff's Department. His voice was gravel and fatigue. Mr. Morgan, I've been assigned to your daughter's case. I'd like to speak with you when you're ready. I'm ready now, I said. Miller's eyes moved briefly to Caleb, then back to me. Maybe somewhere a little more private. We stepped into the hallway. Miller pulled the door closed behind us and stood with his back to the wall, coffee cup held in both hands like something to hold on to. Up close, he looked older than I'd first thought. Not just tired, but worn in the specific way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has stopped expecting anyone to help him put it down. Mr. Morgan, he said, and his voice dropped to something just above a murmur. I'm going to tell you something that I probably shouldn't tell you, and I'm going to ask you to hear it and not do anything stupid. I'm a retired state auditor, I said. Stupid is not really my brand. Something moved across his face that might in a different situation have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't get there. Dr. Mercer filed the APS report tonight. I've read it. He paused. I've also read the other 4. My stomach dropped. The other 4 what? Reports, Miller said. 4 prior reports filed over the last 18 months. Neighbor complaints. An ER visit 14 months ago that was logged as a kitchen accident. A wellness check 6 months back, requested by a woman at your daughter's church. He looked down at his coffee. Every one of them closed before it got anywhere. Insufficient evidence. Witness recanted. Referral lost in the system. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you deserve straight. The Thornton family, Caleb's father, Elias. Thornton, the county commissioner, he has been in that office for 3 terms. He controls the pension fund for every officer in this department. He has sitting judges at his Christmas party every year. I can write this up, I can push it up the chain, and it will close, just like the others. And the only thing that will have changed is that they'll know your name. My hands were clenched at my sides so tightly that my arms were shaking from the effort of keeping them still. The fury was enormous, white, and total. The kind that doesn't roar, it just expands, filling every available space inside your chest, until there is no room left for anything else. So, you're telling me, I said very quietly, that this has happened before, that people knew, and that nothing was done. That's what I'm telling you, Miller said. He had the decency to look ashamed when he said it. His jaw was tight and his eyes were fixed on a point somewhere near the floor. I'm sorry, I genuinely am. But if you walk in loud and angry and make accusations in this county, you will walk straight into the story they've already written for you. Unstable father, difficult family dynamic. Nothing to see here. He finally looked up at me. I can't help you the way you need to be helped. I want you to understand that I know that. And I want you to know that I'm telling you this because he stopped, swallowed. Because 4 reports got buried and your daughter is in that room. I looked back through the glass panel in the waiting room door. Caleb was back in his chair phone, in hand thumb, moving across the screen. Mr. Morgan, Miller said, don't do anything that gives them a reason to come after you. I won't, I said. I meant it. I had no intention of giving them a reason. I had no intention of giving them anything at all. Not a complaint, not a confrontation, not one loud, traceable, dismissible moment of grief. I pushed open the waiting room door. Caleb looked up from his phone. Reverend Okafor was on his feet now, moving toward me from the corner, his hand reaching out his mouth, already forming words of comfort. I walked past both of them without stopping. Behind me, I heard Caleb's voice smooth, controlled slightly louder than necessary. "Arthur, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sarah is clumsy, you know that. She always has been. Why don't we sit down and—" I let the door close between us. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for a long time before I started the engine. The rain had eased to a fine mist, the kind that doesn't fall so much as hang in the air, coating everything with a thin layer of cold. Through the windshield, the lights of Cypress General blurred and smeared. I watched an ambulance pull in at the far end of the lot, its lights rotating without urgency, the way they do when the emergency is already over. And what remains is just the paperwork. 4 reports, buried, 18 months. My daughter had been in that house for 3 years. I did the arithmetic the way I always do, automatically without choosing to. The way a carpenter looks at a crooked frame and can't stop himself from calculating the degree of deviation. 18 months of documented incidents, which meant the incidents themselves had started earlier, which meant that when Sarah had called me last Christmas and said everything was fine, she had been lying and I had let her lie because I wanted to believe it, because it was easier, because I was 60 years old and tired and I had already lost one person I loved, and I could not bring myself to look too hard at the possibility of losing another. I hit the steering wheel with the heel of my hand, once hard. The horn gave a short startled bleat into the empty parking lot. Then I started the engine and drove home. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I had left in such a hurry that I hadn't turned on the porch light, and coming back to a dark house at midnight felt like a particular kind of punishment. I sat in the car for another minute, looking at the front door, at the dark windows at the oak tree in the side yard, still dripping from the rain. Dorothy had planted that tree the spring after we moved in. Sarah had been 2 years old and had insisted on helping, which had meant mostly getting dirt on herself and asking questions. Dorothy had answered every single one of them with complete seriousness, crouched down in the mud in her good jeans, explaining root systems and water tables to a 2-year-old who understood none of it but loved the sound of her mother's voice. I got out of the car and went inside. The kitchen table still had my old audit file on it, still had the cold coffee. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room, at the chair where Dorothy used to sit, at the 2 cups, at the ordinary evidence of a life that had been quietly falling apart in ways I had refused to see, and I felt a grief so complete and so furious that it nearly took my legs out from under me a second time. I said her name out loud into the empty kitchen. Dorothy. Just that. Just her name. I don't know what I expected. The refrigerator hummed, the faucet dripped once. Outside, the oak tree moved in a small gust of wind. She wasn't there. She hadn't been there for 5 years. But I could hear her voice anyway, the way I always could when things got bad enough clear and dry and without any patience for self-pity. "Arthur, you don't fight fires with your fists. You find where they started." That had been her advice on my 3rd week at the state auditor's office when I had come home furious about a county treasurer who was skimming infrastructure funds and smiling at me across the conference table. I had wanted to walk back in there and put my hand through the wall. Dorothy had been sitting at this same kitchen table grading papers she taught 4th grade for 26 years, and she had looked up at me over her reading glasses and said it like it was obvious, like it was the simplest thing in the world. You don't fight fires with your fists. You find where they started. I had built my entire career on that sentence. I moved to the kitchen counter and opened the cabinet above the refrigerator. In the back behind, a box of old tax returns and a broken flashlight I kept meaning to throw away was a cardboard box I had not opened since the day I retired. I pulled it down and set it on the table and opened it. Inside, 6 fresh legal pads still in their plastic sleeve. A set of Ticonderoga pencils sharpened wrapped with a rubber band. A Texas Instruments calculator from 1994 that still worked. The small tools of a working life. I pulled out one legal pad and set it on the table in front of me. I pulled out a pencil. I sat down in my chair not Dorothy's, and I opened the pad to the first page. At the top of the page, I wrote one word. Thornton. Below it, I wrote the date. Below that, Cypress General Hospital, Dr. Catherine Mercer. 36 documented injuries, multiple healing stages. Below that, Detective Ray Miller, 4 prior reports all closed. Below that, Elias Thornton County Commissioner, 3 terms controls pension fund and judiciary. I wrote for 45 minutes without stopping. Everything I had seen, everything Miller had told me, everything I had observed about Caleb in that waiting room, the suit still buttoned, the tie still straight, the thumb moving across the phone screen while his wife lay 20 feet away. When I finished, I set the pencil down and looked at what I had. It was the beginning. It was only a beginning, a first page, a list of facts, nothing proven, nothing connected. But I had started enough audits in my life to know that every one of them looked like this at the start. A page of names and numbers and question marks. And that what came next was always the same. You pulled the first thread, and you pulled it slowly, and you let the fabric tell you where it wanted to come apart. I reached down to the bottom drawer of the kitchen desk, the drawer I almost never opened, and I pulled out a folded newspaper from 3 months ago that I had saved without quite knowing why. I spread it on the table next to the legal pad. The front page headline read, Elias Thornton wins. Third term as Cypress County Commissioner. There was a photograph of Thornton at a podium, hand raised grinning at a crowd. He had silver hair and the particular physical ease of a man who had never once walked into a room wondering if he belonged there. Below the photograph in a smaller column was a list of campaign contributors. I ran my finger down the list until I found it. Third line from the bottom in small print. Cypress Heights Construction, LLC. I picked up my pencil and drew a slow, careful line underneath the name. The same deliberate motion I had used 10,000 times in 35 years of audit work. Not angry, not rushed. Just marking something that needed to be looked at more closely. Then I picked up my phone and called the hospital to check on Sarah one more time before I tried to sleep. The overnight nurse told me her vitals were stable and that she was resting. Tell her. I started and then stopped because there was no message that fit inside a phone call to a woman who couldn't hear it yet. Tell her I called, I said. Of course, Mr. Morgan, the nurse said. Of course. I hung up. I looked at the name on the newspaper. I looked at the word at the top of my legal pad. Then I turned off the kitchen light, left both coffee cups on the table, 2 cups the way I always did, and went to bed. I did not sleep, but I lay in the dark and I thought, and thinking for a man who knew how to do it was not so different from working. The call came at 7:43 the next morning, while I was on my 3rd cup of coffee and my 2nd page of notes. Mr. Morgan. The voice was deep and unhurried with the particular cadence of a man who had spent decades speaking to people in the worst moments of their lives. This is Reverend Thomas Okafor. I was at the hospital last night. I don't believe we had the chance to speak. I remembered him, the tall man in the corner, white hair watching me with that expression I couldn't quite name. I remember you, I said. I've known about the Thornton family for a long time, Okafor said. His voice dropped half a register. Longer than I care to admit. There is a young woman you should speak with. Her name is Chloe Reed. She worked for Caleb Thornton until 14 months ago, when he fired her and did his level best to make sure she never worked in this county again. A pause. She has been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. I believe you are that someone. My pen was already moving across the legal pad. Where can I find her? He gave me an address, a coffee shop on the east side of town, far enough from the courthouse square that it didn't attract the kind of clientele who reported conversations to people with offices in government buildings. Mr. Morgan. Okafor said, before I could hang up, I have watched this family harm people for 11 years. I have prayed, I have counseled, I have sat with people who were afraid to speak above a whisper. His voice tightened, and for the first time, I heard the fury underneath the composure. I am very glad you came home. I was in my car 12 minutes later. Chloe Reed was 28 years old and looked like someone who had been through a fight she hadn't entirely finished losing. She was sitting at a corner table with a laptop open and a coffee going cold beside it, wearing a jacket that was slightly too big for her, her dark hair pulled back with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had stopped caring about appearances. Around the same time, everything else fell apart. When I walked in, she looked up and studied me, the way people study strangers. They have been told to expect measuring cautious, not quite ready to trust. Mr. Morgan, she said, not a question. Miss Reed. I sat down across from her and put my legal pad on the table between us, open to the page with Thornton at the top. I watched her eyes go to it, and I watched something shift in her expression, a loosening like a door that has been locked a long time and finally hears the right key. Reverend Okafor said you worked for the County Land Management Office, I said, under Caleb Thornton. For 2 years, her jaw tightened, until I found something I wasn't supposed to find and made the mistake of saying so out loud. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, squeezing until her knuckles went pale. He didn't just fire me, Mr. Morgan. He told the county HR office I had falsified data. He told the 3 other government offices I applied to that I had a performance problem. I haven't worked in my field in 14 months. Her voice cracked on the last word, sharp and sudden, like a bone under pressure. I have a master's degree in information systems. I'm 28 years old. I'm waitressing on weekends. The anger in her voice was the clean, honest kind that comes from genuine injustice, and it hit me somewhere I recognized. "What did you find?" I said. She turned the laptop toward me. The screen showed a spreadsheet columns of contract numbers, vendor names, award dates, dollar amounts. She had highlighted a series of rows in yellow. "Cypress Heights Construction," she said, tapping the screen. They won 14 of the 17 public land contracts awarded in the last 2 years, all of them reviewed and approved by Caleb Thornton. I flagged it because the bidding documentation was incomplete on 9 of those contracts. Required competitor bids were either missing or submitted by companies that share a registered agent with Cypress Heights. She looked at me steadily. "In information systems, we call that a pattern. In plain English, it means the competition was fake." My chest tightened. Cypress Heights Construction. The same name I had underlined in the newspaper at 2 in the morning. "When you flagged it," I said, "what happened?" "Caleb called me into his office and told me I had misread the data." Her eyes went hard. I hadn't misread anything. I had a master's degree and 4 years of experience, and I knew exactly what I was looking at. She pulled the laptop back, closed it halfway. "He fired me the next day. Told me if I said anything to anyone, he would make sure I couldn't get hired in the state of Georgia." "Did he know you kept copies of the files?" For the first time, something that was almost a smile crossed her face, grim and brief. "He assumed I was too scared to keep anything. He assumed wrong." She reached into her bag and set a small external drive on the table between us. "Everything I saved before I left. All of it obtained during my normal course of employment, legally, properly, nothing he can touch." She pushed it toward me. "I've been sitting on this for 14 months, waiting for someone with the right background to know what to do with it." I picked up the drive. I turned it over in my hand. "Miss Reed," I said, "I spent 35 years as a state auditor. I know exactly what to do with it." I met her eyes. "But I need you to understand, this is going to get harder before it gets easier." She picked up her coffee, took a long sip, and set it down with the deliberateness of someone who had already made their decision a long time ago. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "it has been hard for 14 months. I am very ready for a different kind of hardship." 3 days after I met Chloe Reed in that coffee shop, after I had gone home and spent an evening working through the files on her external drive, cross-referencing her saved records against everything I already had, the official documents arrived. I had filed the request the morning after our meeting, a formal written submission under the Georgia Open Records Act section, 501870, addressed to the Cypress County Land Management Office. Any citizen had the right to request public records from a government agency. Contracts, bid documentation, financial disbursements, all of it. Public record, all of it legally required to be produced within 3 business days. I had filed enough of these requests in my career to know exactly how to write one that left no room for delay or evasion. The packet arrived by email at 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday. 41 pages of contracts, bid summaries, and disbursement records. I printed every page and spread them across my kitchen table. Chloe arrived at 10 with her laptop and a box of her own files, the ones she had saved from her time at the land management office. She stood in my kitchen doorway, looked at the table covered in documents, and something moved across her face that was equal parts grief and hunger. "Okay," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's find it." We worked for 6 hours straight. Chloe moved through numbers the way I did not reading them, so much as listening to them, waiting for the note that didn't belong. She had her files open on the laptop, cross-referencing her saved records against the public documents I had obtained. I worked through the contracts by hand pencil, moving margin notes, accumulating the old rhythm of audit work settling into my shoulders like something I had never actually put down. At 2 in the afternoon, Chloe made a sharp sound, not quite a word, and turned the laptop toward me. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight. "Bid submission dates. On 11 of the 14 Cypress Heights contracts, the competing bids were submitted within the same 40-minute window. Same day, same time-stamped cluster." She tapped the screen hard with one finger. "That does not happen in a legitimate bidding process. That happens when someone tells 3 shell companies to submit losing bids simultaneously, so the paperwork looks complete." I leaned in. She was right. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. The kind of thing that hides in plain sight inside a stack of routine documents, invisible to anyone who doesn't know what legitimate bidding timelines look like. "Cross-reference the registered agents," I said. She was already doing it. Her fingers moved fast, pulling up a Georgia Secretary of State business registry search, another public database freely accessible to anyone. It took her 4 minutes. Cypress Heights Construction, she said. Registered agent Harlan D. Webb. She pulled up the next company. Southern Land Partners LLC, same registered agent. Harlan D. Webb. She pulled up the third. Piedmont Development Group. She stopped, drew a slow breath. Harlan D. Webb. The room felt suddenly very still. 3 competing companies, I said, all run by the same registered agent, all submitting losing bids on contracts won by Cypress Heights. I picked up my pencil. This isn't a bidding process. This is theater. There's more. Chloe's voice had gone quiet in the way voices go quiet when they are carrying something heavy. She turned the laptop again. I cross-referenced the contract approval signatures. Every single Cypress Heights award, all 14, was signed by one person. She looked at me. Caleb Thornton. I wrote the name down. I had already known it was coming, but seeing it written on a government document, his signature authorizing millions of dollars to a company owned by his father's network, made my jaw tighten until I felt it in my back teeth. And Sarah, Chloe said carefully, is in the public deed records. I looked up from the legal pad. She pulled up a document on screen, a deed of trust filed 8 months ago with the Cypress County Recorder's Office. Another public record. She enlarged the signature block at the bottom, Sarah Morgan Thornton, and beside it, a notarized date. I stared at my daughter's signature for a long time. It was wrong. I had seen Sarah's handwriting her entire life on birthday cards and college essays, and the sticky notes she used to leave on my refrigerator. This signature was compressed uneven, the letters crowding each other the way handwriting does when the hand producing it is shaking. She signed her house over as collateral, Chloe said quietly. 8 months ago, on a loan taken out by a holding company tied to Cypress Heights. She paused. Arthur, look at the loan amount. I looked. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. She didn't know what she was signing, I said. It wasn't a question. No, Chloe said. I don't think she did. Her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears, but was close enough. And I think that's exactly why they needed her to stay quiet. I set my pencil down on the table. I pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed one breath too. The way I had learned to breathe in the middle of audits when the numbers revealed something so much worse than expected that the mind needed a moment to catch up with what the eyes were reading. Then I picked the pencil back up. I need to make a phone call, I said. Marcus Vance picked up on the second ring, the way he always had, as if he had been sitting beside the phone expecting it, which knowing Marcus was entirely possible. Arthur Morgan, he said. Not a greeting exactly, more like a man reading a name off a list he had been keeping in his head and was not entirely surprised to see come up. It's been 4 years. 3 years and 8 months, I said. A short pause. Then with the warmth of a man who expresses affection through precision. You always did count things. Marcus Vance was 65 years old and built like a man who had spent his 20s doing things that had no official name and his 40s doing things that did 22 years in the Army, the last 6 in units that didn't appear on any public organizational chart, followed by 18 years as a special investigator for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We had met 30 years ago over a conference table in Atlanta, 2 young men on opposite sides of a tax fraud case, and had spent the intervening decades maintaining the particular friendship of people who trust each other completely and see each other rarely. He lived in a suburb east of Atlanta, in a house that was meticulously organized and almost entirely devoid of decoration. The way the homes of people who have spent years in operational environments tend to be nothing on the walls that couldn't be left behind quickly, nothing in the drawers that didn't serve a purpose. I drove to him that same evening. He met me at the door with 2 mugs of coffee, handed me one without asking, and led me to the kitchen table without a word of small talk. That was Marcus. He had always understood that some conversations didn't need a runway. I laid out everything. The 36 injuries, Miller's confession about the 4 buried reports, Elias Thornton's grip on the county judiciary and pension fund, Chloe's data on the Cypress Heights contracts, Sarah's forged signature on a deed of trust she hadn't understood. Marcus listened the way he always listened, completely still, coffee untouched eyes steady on mine. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just absorbed the way a man absorbs incoming information when he has been trained to separate emotion from assessment. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee, took a long sip, and set it down. How long has this been going on? He said. At least 18 months documented, I said. Probably longer. And the county, completely compromised. Sheriff's Department, to the sitting judges, the Planning Commission. I pushed the legal pad across the table. Miller, the detective who talked to me, he said 4 prior reports were buried. He said if I push it locally, it closes. Again. Marcus looked at the legal pad. He turned it toward himself and read slowly line by line the way he used to read financial disclosures. Methodically, his lips not quite moving. When he got to the bottom, he tapped the page once with one finger. "You need to go federal," he said. "That's why I'm here." He leaned back in his chair. For a moment he looked older than 65, not frail, nothing like frail, but carrying the particular weight of a man who has spent his life understanding how badly systems can fail the people they were built to protect. His jaw was tight. His eyes were very clear. "Arthur," he said, "I still have an active security clearance and standing relationships with 3 people at the DOJ and 2 at FBI Atlanta. When I left the IRS, I kept my federal whistleblower submission credentials. There is an encrypted direct submission channel through the DOJ Office of Inspector General that bypasses all state and local handling entirely. A package submitted through that channel goes directly to Washington. It does not touch a single inbox, a single desk, a single pair of hands in the state of Georgia that Elias Thornton has ever spoken to. It arrives clean. My chest loosened by 1 degree, just 1. But it was the first degree it had loosened in 4 days. "What do we need?" I said. "Everything you showed me tonight properly organized." He started counting on his fingers. "The contracts and bid records from your open records request, Chloe's analysis with her source documentation, the deed of trust with Sarah's signature, Dr. Mercer's medical records if she'll authorize release." He stopped. "And something from inside the Thornton house itself, something their own people created. The cleanest evidence is always the evidence the subject generated themselves." I thought about something Sarah had said on the phone 3 months ago. A passing comment, the kind you file away without knowing why. She had mentioned a woman who worked in the Thornton household. Elena, she had called her. And she had said very quietly, almost as an afterthought, "Dad, I think she's scared too." "There might be someone," I said. "Inside the house." "Yes." Marcus set his coffee down very carefully. He looked at me with the expression of a man recalculating risk parameters in real time. "If there's a source inside that house," he said, "getting them out safely is the first priority. Everything else is secondary." "Agreed," I said. He stood up, walked to the counter, and came back with a notepad of his own, smaller than mine, spiral-bound, the kind you can fit in a jacket pocket. He sat back down and uncapped a pen. "All right," he said. "Tell me about this woman." Outside, the Atlanta suburbs were quiet under a clear November sky. Inside, 2 old men with pencils and a combined 68 years of following money through dark places sat across a kitchen table and began carefully to build something. Dr. Catherine Mercer's office was the last one at the end of a hallway that smelled like floor cleaner and old coffee, and when I knocked at 5:30 on a Wednesday evening, she opened the door herself before I had finished the second knock, as if she had been standing on the other side of it, waiting. She looked different from the night she had walked me into Sarah's room. The clinical composure was still there, but underneath it, something had shifted. Her eyes were tired in the specific way of someone who had not been sleeping well, and the way she checked the hallway in both directions before she let me in told me everything I needed to know about what the last week had cost her. "I wondered when you'd come back," she said, closing the door behind me and turning the small lock on the handle. "I've been expecting you." "Then you know why I'm here," I said. "I know what I did," she said, "and I know what I'm risking by talking to you." She moved to her desk, but didn't sit. She stood behind it the way people stand behind furniture when they need something solid between themselves and a difficult conversation. 3 days after I filed the APS report, I received a call from the hospital administrator. He told me that a complaint had been filed against my license with the Georgia Medical Board. Anonymous complaint. Alleged clinical negligence. Her voice stayed level, but her hands pressed flat on the desk were trembling visibly. "I have practiced medicine for 17 years, Mr. Morgan. I have never had a complaint filed against me in my life." "Elias Thornton," I said. "I cannot prove that." She looked at me directly. "But I know it. The way you know certain things in this county, not because someone tells you, but because you understand how the machine works." She took a breath. "He wanted me to amend Sarah's records, change the documentation from a pattern injury assessment to accidental trauma. I was told, not asked, told that if I cooperated, the complaint would be withdrawn. My jaw tightened so hard, it sent a pulse of pain up toward my left ear. Did you amend them? Yes, she said, and the word hit her visibly. Her shoulders dropped, her chin came up in the way of someone absorbing a blow they had been bracing for. I amended the official record. I had no choice, Mr. Morgan. My license is not just my livelihood. It is how I take care of my patients. Her eyes went bright and furious. But I want you to understand what I did before I changed that file. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She set it in front of me. Before I made any changes, she said, her voice dropping to something careful and precise, I submitted a full anonymous report to the Georgia Medical Board myself, including the original findings, the imaging analysis, and a complete timeline of events, filed through the board's confidential reporting system. It is now part of their independent record, completely outside this hospital's system, completely outside anything Elias Thornton can touch. She paused. And the amended file, the one I was forced to change, I made sure to save it through the hospital's document management system in a way that preserved the modification history. I looked up from the paper. Modification history. Every change made to a digital medical record is logged automatically, she said. Timestamp. User ID, the IP address of the workstation used to initiate the request. She met my eyes steadily. The request to amend Sarah's file did not come from my workstation, Mr. Morgan. It came from a computer registered to the office of the Cypress County Commissioner. The room went very quiet around me, not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of something enormous settling into place. You have documentation of this, I said. I have a screenshot of the modification log taken before the system could be cleared. She opened her laptop, turned it toward me. I also have the original imaging films locked in a safety deposit box at a bank in Augusta, 2 hours from here under my mother's maiden name. For the first time, something crossed her face that was almost fierce. I did not go to medical school for 17 years to let someone erase what was done to that young woman. I studied the modification log on the screen, the IP address, the timestamp, the user ID tracing back to a government workstation that had no legitimate reason to be inside a patient's medical file. Dr. Mercer, I said, I need your permission to include this in a federal evidence package. She closed the laptop, straightened up behind her desk. For a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who was frightened and exhausted and absolutely certain about what she was going to say next. You have it, she said, every last piece of it. On my way out, she called after me from the doorway. Mr. Morgan, I turned. Her voice had dropped back to something quiet. Tell me when she wakes up, please. You'll be the second call I make, I said. Her chin trembled once quickly and then steadied. Good, she said. Good. I found Elena Vasquez's number, the same way I found most things, by being systematic about it. On my third visit to the hospital, I had asked the attending nurse about Sarah's personal belongings, the ordinary things a person carries that end up in a bag when they are admitted unconscious. The nurse had confirmed that Caleb Thornton had not requested them. I had signed for the bag without hesitation. I was her father. I was listed as emergency contact, and Caleb had made no claim. Sarah's phone had been inside, sealed in a plastic Ziploc, with her rings and her watch and a receipt from a gas station in Milledgeville. I went through Sarah's contacts that same evening, sitting in the hospital parking lot under a light that buzzed and flickered. Most of the names I recognized. Near the bottom, listed simply as Elena V., was a number with a Georgia area code. Beside it, in Sarah's handwriting, she had a habit of adding notes to her contacts were 4 words. She's scared too, Dad. My throat closed up so completely that I had to press my fist against my sternum and breathe through it. Sarah had written that note for me. Not consciously, maybe, not sitting down and thinking, someday my father will need this. But some part of her had known the way people in dangerous situations develop a quiet instinct for leaving trails. I photographed the screen and sent it to Marcus that night. He called back 14 minutes later. I'll reach out to her, he said. You stay clear. If the Thorntons are watching you and they are watching you, your name anywhere near this woman puts her at risk. Understood, I said. Arthur? His voice dropped. If she has what we think she has, getting her out safely is the whole game. Everything else is secondary. He was right. I knew he was right. I spent the next 3 days doing the hardest thing I had done since I sat down at that kitchen table and opened the legal pad. I waited. Marcus called me on a Wednesday night at 11:47. She's in the car, he said. She's safe. We're across the county line. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not a chair, the floor, my back against the cabinet, because my legs simply stopped being willing to hold me. I pressed the phone against my ear and listened to the sound of a car moving on a highway, and felt something release in my chest that had been locked tight for days. "Is she all right?" I said. "She's shaken. She's been holding this for a long time." A pause. "Arthur, she had the phone ready. She walked out of that house with it in her coat pocket. She knew exactly what she was doing." Elena Vasquez was 41 years old and had worked in the Thornton household for 6 years. She was a small woman with careful eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had learned very early that drawing attention to yourself was dangerous. When Marcus brought her to my house the following morning, a detour on the way to Tennessee, where a women's advocacy organization Marcus knew had agreed to house her temporarily, she sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea and looked at me with the exhausted directness of a person who is done being afraid. "Mrs. Vasquez," I said, "you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me." "I want to tell you," she said. Her accent was soft, her English careful and precise, the English of someone who had worked hard to earn it. "I have wanted to tell someone for a very long time." She looked down at her tea. "The first time Elias Thornton raised his voice at me, I was so frightened I dropped an entire tray of dishes. That was 6 years ago." She looked back up. "I learned very quickly that in that house you do not make noise, you do not ask questions, and you do not let them see you looking. But you kept your phone," I said. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but close. "My daughter gave me that phone," she said. "She showed me how to use the voice recorder application. She said, 'Mama, if anyone ever hurts you, you press this button.'" Her jaw tightened. I pressed it many times. She reached into her coat pocket and set an older model smartphone on the table between us. The screen was cracked across one corner, a thin fracture running from edge to edge. "Georgia law," Marcus said from the doorway where he was leaning with his arms crossed, "is a one-party consent state, meaning a person can legally record any conversation they are a participant in or present for. Every file on that phone was recorded while Elena was in the room." He looked at me. "It's clean, Arthur, every bit of it." I picked up the phone carefully the way you pick up something that has cost a great deal to obtain. "May I said, looking at Elena. She nodded once firmly. I opened the audio files. There were 37 of them spanning 14 months each one, labeled with a date in Elena's handwriting on the case. I pressed play on the most recent. The sound quality was imperfect, the muffled close recording of a phone in a coat pocket, but the voices were clear enough. A man's voice, low and authoritative, speaking with the ease of someone who had never once worried about being overheard. And then a woman's voice, clipped and certain. "Make sure the Morgan Women's Foundation gets the transfer this week." Harlan confirmed the account. I stopped the recording. My hand was trembling. I set the phone down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and stared at the surface and breathed one breath, 2, 3, while the words arranged themselves into their full meaning inside my head. The Morgan Women's Foundation. Dorothy's Foundation. They had used her name. They had taken the small good thing my wife had built in her lifetime, the scholarship fund she had spent her last healthy years establishing for 4th grade teachers in low-income districts, and they had used it to move dirty money. "Arthur?" Marcus's voice came from very far away. He had crossed the room without my noticing, and his hand was on my shoulder, heavy and steady. "Arthur, stay with me?" "I'm here," I said. My voice came out strange, flat and distant, the voice from the end of a very long tunnel. "Good." He squeezed once. "Because we just found the federal hook." Elena was watching me from across the table with eyes full of something that was grief and apology in equal measure, as if she was sorry to be the one who had to show me this. I looked at her, and I thought about what it had cost her to carry this for 14 months in a cracked phone in a coat pocket waiting for someone to come. "Mrs. Vasquez," I said, and my voice had steadied again the way it steadies when you make the decision that replaces grief with purpose. "Thank you. For every single one of these." Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together tightly and nodded, and the nod said everything that words were too small to hold. Before I go any further, if you're still with me, drop a 10 in the comments right now. I want to know you're here because what I'm about to tell you changes everything about this case. A note, before we continue, some elements of this story are fictional woven in to bring the deeper truth to life. If that's not the kind of story you're here for, no hard feelings. This is a good place to step away. After Marcus drove Elena to Tennessee, I sat at the kitchen table with her phone and my legal pad and did not move for a long time. Chloe arrived at 9. She came through the front door with her laptop bag over one shoulder and 2 coffees from the gas station on Route 9. And she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at me, really looked the way a person looks, When they can see that something has shifted in someone overnight, and she set both coffees on the table without a word and sat down. "Tell me," she said. I played her the recording. When Beatrice Thornton's voice filled the kitchen, "Make sure the Morgan Women's Foundation gets the transfer this week." Chloe's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes went wide and then immediately narrow, the way eyes go when shock converts to anger in real time. "Dorothy Morgan Foundation," I said. "My wife built it the last 3 years of her life. Scholarship fund for elementary school teachers in low-income districts. She raised $47,000 before she got too sick to continue." Chloe lowered her hand from her mouth. Her jaw was set hard. "They used her name," she said, and her voice had a rawness to it that surprised me, the genuine outrage of someone encountering cruelty that exceeds even their worst expectations. "Arthur? They used a dead woman's name to move dirty money." "Yes," I said, "they did." The fury was there, enormous total, the kind that fills every space inside you and leaves no room for anything else. I let it be there. I did not push it down, and I did not let it move me before I was ready. I picked up my pencil instead, the way I had always picked up my pencil when the numbers showed me something that made me want to put my fist through a wall. "Pull the Form 990, I said. Chloe was already opening her laptop. Every nonprofit organization registered under Section 501(c)(3) of the Internal Revenue Code was required to file a Form 990 annually, a public document freely accessible through the IRS database and third-party nonprofit transparency sites. Dorothy Morgan Foundation had filed 3 of them. Chloe had the most recent on-screen in under 4 minutes. "Here," she said, turning the laptop toward me. "Financial statements schedule, B donor contributions schedule, I grants." She scrolled down and stopped. "Arthur, look at this. A single line item in the contribution schedule, dated 8 months ago. Amount $230,000. Donor listed as Piedmont Community Trust." My pencil stopped moving. $230,000 into a foundation that had raised $47,000 over 3 years. Into Dorothy's foundation. "Piedmont Community Trust," Chloe said, and she was already searching, her fingers moving fast. "Let me find the registration." 30 seconds. "Registered in Delaware, registered agent." She stopped. Her face went very still. "Harlan D. Webb, the same registered agent as Cypress Heights Construction, the same name we had found on the shell companies running fake bids on Caleb's land contracts." The pieces clicked together with the particular finality of an audit that has found its center the moment when the random scatter of numbers resolves into a single clear pattern, and you understand that what you have been looking at was never random at all. "It's the same network," I said. "It's all the same network," Chloe said. Her voice was low and very controlled. "Cypress Heights, the shell company's Piedmont Community Trust. It's one system, Arthur. Elias built one system and ran everything through it." I stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the November yard was bare and gray, the oak tree stripped down to its essential structure, every branch visible, nothing hidden by leaves. I looked at it for a moment and thought about Dorothy, planting it, crouched in the mud with 2-year-old Sarah asking questions about root systems. Then I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. I gave him the number, $230,000, Piedmont Community Trust, Harlan D. Webb, the connection back to Cypress Heights. There was a pause on the line that lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "Arthur," Marcus said, and his voice had changed, gone into the particular register of a man who has spent his career recognizing the moment a case changes category, that amount of money moving through a nonprofit from a Delaware trust triggers federal reporting thresholds. And Piedmont Community Trust. Another pause. "I need to make a call." He called back 22 minutes later. "Piedmont Community Trust," he said without preamble, "appears on an active DEA watch list as a financial instrument associated with organized distribution networks in the Southeast. The account has been under passive monitoring for 16 months. His voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of a man delivering information that has weight. "Arthur? The moment that money touched Dorothy's foundation, this became a federal case, not county corruption, not a land contract fraud. Federal DEA, FBI, and DOJ all have jurisdiction." I sat back down at the kitchen table. I looked at Dorothy's photograph on the windowsill, the one from the year we planted the oak tree, her laughing at something off camera, her hair blown sideways by an April wind. "They used her name," I said again. Not to Chloe, not to Marcus, just to the room, just to the photograph. Yes, Marcus said quietly. They did, and that is going to be the last mistake they ever make. He paused. I'm calling Dana Whitmore at FBI Atlanta tonight, but Arthur, once I make this call, the machine starts moving and it does not stop. Are you ready? I looked at the legal pad. I looked at the word at the top of the first page, Thornton, and the 14 pages of notes beneath it. Every number accounted for every connection, documented every thread followed to its source. I looked at Dorothy's photograph one more time. Make the call, I said. 4 days after Marcus made the call to Dana Whitmore, I drove to the grocery store on Clement Avenue to buy coffee and bread and whatever else I could convince myself I needed, which was mostly an excuse to move my body somewhere other than the kitchen table. I was pushing a cart past the cereal aisle when I became aware of them. 2 men, one near the end of the aisle, examining a box of something with the focused attention of a man who has no actual interest in what he is holding. The other behind me close enough that I could hear his breathing, both in their early 40s. Both wearing the particular brand of casual clothing that is not quite casual, the kind you wear when you want to look like you belong somewhere, and don't quite. I had spent 35 years reading things that were designed not to be read. I knew performance when I saw it. I kept pushing the cart. I did not speed up. I did not look at either of them directly. I finished the cereal aisle, turned into the bread aisle, put a loaf of whole wheat in the cart, and continued to the coffee section at the end of the store. They followed at a consistent distance, not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to lose me. At the coffee display, the first man appeared beside me. He was broad-shouldered with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since become merely large. He picked up a bag of coffee from the shelf, turned it over in his hands, and said in a voice that was very pleasant and very quiet, "Mr. Morgan, Commissioner Thornton wanted you to know that he thinks very highly of you. He hopes you're taking good care of yourself." He set the coffee bag back on the shelf, straightened it carefully, as if neatness mattered to him. Then he and the second man walked together toward the front of the store and out through the sliding doors without looking back. I stood in the coffee aisle with my hands on the cart handle and felt my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. My mouth had gone dry. My legs were doing something unreliable. But I did not move. I stood there, and I breathed, and I waited for my heart to slow down, because a frightened man is a readable man, and I was not going to be readable in a grocery store on Clement Avenue where anyone could be watching. I bought the coffee, I bought the bread, I drove home at exactly the speed limit. My phone rang at 8 that evening. The number was Caleb's. I answered it. "Dad?" His voice was warm, practiced warm, the warmth of a man who has learned to deploy it the way other men deploy tools. "I've been thinking about you. I know things have been difficult. I want you to know that I'm here and that I want to find a way through this together." My hand tightened on the phone. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree moved in the dark. "I think there's been some confusion about what happened to Sarah." Caleb continued, his voice smoothing out even further, like a man ironing a shirt he plans to wear to something important. "She has a history of being accident-prone, you know that better than anyone. And I'm worried that some of the people she's been around at the hospital have been filling her head with ideas that aren't helpful to her recovery." "Ideas?" I said. "Yes." A pause. He was listening for something in my voice, trying to take my temperature the way a man does when he needs to know how much the other person knows. "I think it would be good for us to sit down, just the two of us, have a real conversation man to man." "Caleb," I said, "I appreciate you calling." Another pause longer this time, and I could feel him recalibrating, trying to read me the way I was refusing to be read. "Of course," he said. "Family is everything." "It is," I said. "Good night, Caleb." I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a moment and looked at the phone in my hand. He had called to take my temperature, and I had given him nothing, no anger, no accusation, no detectable fear. A worried man calls. A man who knows he's losing calls. A man who still thinks he can manage the situation calls and asks for a meeting. I picked up my legal pad and wrote, "Caleb called. Warm, careful, offered meeting, wants to assess threat level, does not know what we have." Then I called Marcus. "2 men at the grocery store," I said. "And Caleb called tonight. He wanted a meeting." Marcus exhaled slowly. "They're spooked. That's not bad news. Arthur, a spooked man, makes mistakes." A pause. "How are you holding up?" The question surprised me enough that I had to think about the honest answer. My hands had stopped shaking somewhere between the grocery store and the kitchen table. My heart had been back at its normal rhythm for hours, but somewhere in my chest, there was a tightness that had been there since the night of the first phone call and showed no signs of leaving. "I'm all right," I said. Good. Another pause. I got word from Whitmore today. She's reviewed the preliminary package. She says she needs two more things before she can move the financial trail between Piedmont Trust and the DEA flagged account fully documented and something directly from inside the Thornton operation. He stopped. Arthur, has Sarah shown any signs? The hospital called this morning, I said. They said she's showing neurological responses. The doctor said it could be days or it could be longer. My throat tightened around the last word. But she's moving in the right direction. That's good, Marcus said, and he meant it. I could hear it in the way his voice softened at the edges. That's very good. One more piece, I said. That's all we need. One more piece, Marcus agreed. After I hung up, I sat for a while in the kitchen that smelled like old coffee and pencil shavings, and the particular quiet of a house that has been lived in by the same person for a very long time. I thought about Sarah in that hospital bed, her neurological responses firing back to life like a house coming back on after a long power outage room, by circuit, slowly finding its way back to itself. Come back, I said to the empty kitchen. Just come back. The oak tree moved outside the window. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I picked up my pencil and went back to work. We built the package over 2 days at Marcus's kitchen table in Atlanta. I drove down on a Friday morning with everything: the legal pads, Chloe's analysis files on a thumb drive, the printed open records documents, Dr. Mercer's modification log, screenshots the written authorization she had signed, allowing use of her findings in Elena's phone, which Marcus had already had forensically imaged by a retired FBI technician he trusted, so that the original files were preserved with proper chain of custody documentation. Marcus had his own materials spread across the other half of the table. His notes from the conversation with Whitmore, a printed summary of the DEA watch list entry for Piedmont Community Trust, and a yellow legal pad covered in his small, precise handwriting that I recognized as the same handwriting from 30 years of correspondence. We worked methodically. That was the only way either of us knew how to work. I organized the financial evidence into 3 sections. First, the Cypress Heights contract fraud. 14 contracts, shell company bid. Manipulation all traceable through public records to Caleb Thornton's approvals and Harlan D. Webb's registered agent network. Second, the money laundering chain, Piedmont Community Trust, the Delaware Incorporation. The transfer into Dorothy Morgan Foundation, the DEA flag source account. Third, the pattern of concealment, Dr. Mercer's modification log, showing intervention from the county commissioner's office, the 4 buried APS reports Miller had described the timeline of Sarah's documented injuries across multiple healing stages. Chloe had added something I had not asked for but immediately understood the value of. She had compiled a chronological cross-reference table, every event, every document, every financial transaction laid out in date order on a single spreadsheet, color-coded by category. It was the kind of work that takes a complicated case and makes it simple, that takes a pile of evidence and turns it into a story that anyone can follow. This is exceptional, I told her when I saw it. She was on the phone from her apartment walking me through it remotely. I've had 14 months of anger to work with, she said. Anger is very motivating. When the package was complete, Marcus counted the pages. 114. He squared them against the table edge, put them in a flat document mailer, and sealed it. All right, he said. He picked up his phone. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happens next, because I want you to understand it. He explained it the way he explained everything clearly without condescension, assuming I was intelligent enough to follow if he was precise enough to lead. The DOJ Office of Inspector General maintained an encrypted direct submission channel specifically designed for sensitive financial evidence separate from any state or local system, operating through a federally secured digital network that bypassed all local handling. Marcus had used it throughout his years at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. His submission credentials and security clearance remained active after retirement. The package goes to 2 addresses simultaneously, he said. Dana Whitmore, Special Agent in Charge, FBI Atlanta Financial Crimes Unit, and the Office of the Inspector General, Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. He looked at me. It does not touch a single inbox, a single desk, a single pair of hands in the state of Georgia that Elias Thornton has ever spoken to. It arrives clean. How long? I said. Whitmore will have it by the end of business Monday. I nodded. Marcus sealed the mailer with a strip of tamper-evident tape signed across the seal and handed it to the courier. a quiet man in his 60s who had appeared at the door at precisely the time Marcus had arranged, and who took the package with the practiced indifference of a man who had carried important things for a long time and understood that the importance was not his business. We watched the courier's car pull out of the driveway and turn onto the street and disappear. Marcus exhaled, long and slow, the way a man exhales when he has been holding something in for a while. "Good," he said. "Now we wait." Whitmore called on Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had me on speaker at the kitchen table when she came through a woman's voice, measured and precise, with the particular cadence of someone who chooses words carefully, because she has learned that imprecise words cost cases. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I've spent 3 days with your package. I want to share some preliminary observations." "Go ahead," Marcus said. "The financial documentation is exceptionally organized," Whitmore said. "The chronological cross-reference in particular, whoever built that knows what they're doing." A brief pause. "The modification log from the medical records is significant. IP address evidence tying the county commissioner's office to interference with a domestic violence victim's medical file is that significant. We can work with that. And the Piedmont Trust connection," Marcus said. "That's what elevated this." Her voice shifted slightly, still controlled, but with something underneath it that sounded like the focus of a person who has just seen something they have been looking for a long time. "We've had Piedmont Community Trust on a passive monitoring list for 16 months. We've never been able to establish a clear domestic connection that justifies moving from passive to active. What you've given us does that." She paused. "Mr. Vance, I want to be direct with you. If the rest of this documentation holds up to our verification process, what you have handed me is a federal RICO case. Not a county corruption matter, a RICO case." The word landed in the kitchen like something physical. I looked at Marcus, he looked at me. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the expression of a man who has bet everything on a number and just watched it come up. "There are 2 additional items we need," Whitmore continued. "First, complete financial documentation of the Piedmont Trust to DEA flagged account transfer. Your package has the Form 99-0 and the trust registration, but we need the actual wire transfer records. Our financial forensics team can subpoena those, but a preliminary trace from your end would accelerate the timeline significantly." Another pause. "Second, Mr. Vance, you referenced a potential internal source. If that source has direct audio evidence of instruction, that changes the calculus entirely." "We're working on both," Marcus said. "Understood." A brief silence. "Mr. Vance, tell whoever built this package that it's very good work." Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was slightly quieter, slightly less official. "I've seen Sarah Morgan Thornton's medical file, the original one." A beat. "Tell whoever her father is that I understand why he's doing this." The line went quiet for a moment. "I'll tell him," Marcus said. After Whitmore hung up, I sat at the table and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and breathed, just breathed in and out, while the magnitude of what was moving settled around me like weather changing. Then my phone buzzed on the table, an unknown number, a text message, 3 words, no punctuation, no identification. "Back away, Morgan." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I set the phone face down on the table, picked up my pencil, and wrote in my legal pad, "Unknown threat. 4:47 p.m. Tuesday. Thornton aware package is moving." Then I underlined the date. They were scared, and scared men in my experience were the most readable men of all. The waiting was the hardest part. I had spent 35 years learning how to be patient with numbers, how to sit with an incomplete picture, and resist the urge to fill in the gaps before the evidence was ready. But those had been other people's numbers, other people's problems, other people's lives hanging in the balance. This was different. This was Sarah, in a hospital bed, 2 counties north, her neurological responses slowly firing back to life, while I sat at a kitchen table and waited for a federal machine to move at its own speed. I called the hospital every morning at 8. The overnight nurse on Sarah's floor had learned my voice by the 3rd day. "Same as yesterday, Mr. Morgan," she would say. "Stable, moving in the right direction. Moving in the right direction." I wrote those words at the top of a fresh page in my legal pad every morning, the way other people write affirmations or prayers. It was the closest thing to hope I had learned to hold on to, without gripping so hard it broke. Marcus called on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the package had gone out. "Harlan Webb," he said. "Do you remember that name? We had him flagged as the registered agent on the Cypress Heights shell companies, but he also held a position as a Cypress County tax assessor. That's how he was inside the financial network on both ends. I remember him, I said. He appeared twice in Chloe's cross-reference as a signatory on Cypress Heights financial certifications. That's him. Marcus's voice had the particular quality of controlled excitement, the tone of a man who has been waiting for a domino to fall and has just heard the first one go. FBI Financial Crimes ran the Piedmont Trust wire transfer records through their subpoena. Process took them 6 days. Webb's personal accounts show 11 years of deposits that don't correspond to his county salary. Structured deposits kept just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Classic smurfing. They approached him, I said. Yesterday afternoon, standard federal contact, 2 agents, his attorney, present full documentation of what they had. Marcus paused. Arthur Harlan Webb was in that attorney's office for 3 hours. When he came out, he had signed a cooperation agreement. I set my pencil down on the table. My hand was steady. Inside my chest, something that had been coiled tight for weeks, loosened by a single significant degree. How many names? I said. 31, Marcus said. 31 officials across the county sheriff's deputies, 2 sitting judges, the planning commission chair, 4 members of the county contracts review board. A pause that had weight to it. Arthur, one of them is the officer who closed the first APS report on Sarah 14 months ago. The kitchen went very quiet around me. Not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind that happens when something enormous has just been confirmed. Harlan gave them 11 years. Every amount, every date, every method. He gave them the full architecture of how Elias Thornton built his protection network piece by piece from the ground up. Another pause. You know why he talks so fast? Because the evidence was already there, I said. He wasn't deciding whether to confess. He was deciding how much of a head start he could get. Exactly, Marcus said. A man's own words are the one thing he cannot argue away. I picked my pencil back up. I wrote Harlan Webb Cooperation Agreement signed. 31 names, full network architecture, Wednesday. Then my phone buzzed with a second call, a number I recognized as the Cypress County Sheriff's Department. I answered it. Mr. Morgan. Miller's voice was low, slightly rough, the voice of a man calling from somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. I'm going to say this fast because I can't talk long. There are 2 federal agents in Cypress County right now who are not from here. They came in this morning and they have not spoken to anyone in our department. A pause. I don't know what you did or how you did it, but I want you to know those agents being here without going through our office first means somebody made sure they couldn't be warned off. His voice tightened. I've been a detective for 19 years, and I have never once seen a federal team come into this county without a courtesy call to the sheriff first. Another pause shorter. I just wanted you to know that. Thank you, detective, I said. Don't thank me. His voice dropped even further. I should have done more a long time ago. This is the only thing I can do right now that's worth a damn. I heard him clear his throat hard, the sound of a man pushing something down that wanted to come up. How is she? Your daughter. Moving in the right direction, I said. A long pause. Good, he said. That's good. And then very quietly, almost to himself. Good. He hung up. I set the phone down and looked at it for a moment. 19 years, Miller had said. 19 years of watching this county operate the way it operated, of filing things away and closing files and telling himself that this was how things were, and there was nothing one man could do about it. And now he was calling from a corner of his department to tell me that 2 federal agents had arrived without a courtesy call, and his voice had the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had just been given permission to exhale. I thought about the 4 reports. The first one filed 14 months ago by an officer whose name was now on Harlan Webb's cooperation list. 14 months. While Sarah was in that house, while the bruises were forming and healing and forming again, while Caleb was signing contracts and Elias was managing his protection network and Beatrice was moving money through Dorothy's foundation. 14 months. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the oak tree. It was December now, and the tree was bare down to its bones, every branch exposed, every fork visible, the whole structure of it laid out in the gray morning light, without anything to hide behind. That was what winter did to trees. It took everything away except the truth of them. My phone rang again. Marcus. Whitmore just called me, he said, and this time the controlled excitement in his voice had given way to something more direct. Arthur Elias Thornton's personal attorney contacted the DOJ this morning. Elias wants to explore a proffer agreement. My hand tightened on the phone. He's going to give up Beatrice and Caleb, I said. He's going to try, Marcus said. Which means he knows the walls are coming down, and he's calculating who he can trade. A pause. It also means they don't know about Sarah's phone. If they knew what she had, he wouldn't be trying to deal, he'd be running. He doesn't know, I said. Not yet, Marcus said. Arthur, tell me she's going to wake up. I looked at the oak tree stripped bare, and absolutely itself in the December light. She's going to wake up, I said. I know she is. I was not there when they came. I want to be honest about that. After everything the legal pads the open records requests the 2 days at Marcus's kitchen table, building a package that was clean and tight and aimed at the right people, I was not in Cypress County when the federal agents arrived. I was sitting at my own kitchen table at 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee and my legal pad, and I learned about it the way most people learn about things that happen without them, from someone else's words pieced together after the fact. Marcus called first at 6:47, before I had finished my first cup. It's moving, he said. Whitmore executed the warrants this morning, 6:15 a.m., simultaneous entry at the county commissioner's office, Cypress Heights, construction headquarters, and the personal residence. A pause. Arthur, it's moving. I set my coffee cup down very carefully on the table. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I had half expected them to shake after everything, but they were steady the way hands go steady. When the thing you have been bracing for finally arrives, and the bracing is no longer necessary. The accounts, I said, frozen as of 6 a.m., Cypress Heights operating accounts, the Piedmont Trust accounts, 3 personal accounts in Elias Thornton's name. Another pause. There's a 4th account, Cayman Islands registration, flagged by the DEA trace. Whitmore's team is working through international channels on that one. Takes longer, but it'll come. I wrote it all down. Date-time accounts, frozen locations entered, the habit of 35 years when something important happens, you write it down while the details are still exact. Then, I drove to Cypress County. I am not sure I made a conscious decision to go. I simply found myself on the highway heading south, hands on the wheel, the December sky low and gray overhead. I needed to see it, not to celebrate, not to confirm, but in the way that a person who has been working on something for a very long time sometimes needs to stand in the place where the work was done and let the reality of it settle into their bones. I parked on a side street 2 blocks from the county commissioner's office and walked to the corner. There were 4 unmarked federal vehicles in the parking lot. 2 agents in dark jackets stood at the main entrance. A third was carrying a box of files through the front door, banker's boxes, the kind used for document seizure stacked on a hand truck. A small cluster of county employees stood on the sidewalk across the street, some of them with coffee cups, all of them with the uncertain expressions of people who have just watched the ground shift under something they thought was permanent. I stood on the corner for a while and looked at all of it. A building that 3 months ago had been the center of everything that controlled this county, that had housed the man who closed files and bought judges and made problems disappear. And now it had 4 unmarked cars in its parking lot and federal agents carrying its records out in boxes. It looked exactly the same from the outside. Same brick, same flagpole, same engraved letters above the entrance reading Cypress County Commissioner. But the thing that had made it powerful was gone, and you could feel the absence of it even from a street corner 2 blocks away. My phone rang. Detective Miller. I answered it. Mr. Morgan. His voice was rougher than I had ever heard it, scraped raw from the inside, the voice of a man who had been up since before dawn and was running on something that was neither coffee nor sleep. I see you're in town. I looked around, spotted him half a block down, standing beside an unmarked cruiser, his phone to his ear, looking at me. I walked toward him. We met on the sidewalk in front of a closed hardware store, its windows dark, a hand-lettered sign, in the door reading, "Back at 10." Miller looked terrible gray in the face, heavy under the eyes, his jacket wrinkled in the way jackets get wrinkled when they have been slept in. He held out his hand and I shook it. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, cracked and did not recover, just stayed there in the broken place. "I owe Sarah an apology. I owe—" He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. His jaw was working. "4 reports, Mr. Morgan. I read all 4 of them this morning. I pulled them from the archive myself because I needed to see them." His eyes were bright and terrible. She was right there, every single time, and every single time somebody above me made a call and the file got closed and I told myself there was nothing I could do. "Ray," I said. It was the first time I had used his first name, and it stopped him. He looked at me. "You told me the truth," I said. "The night I came to that hospital, you could have said nothing. You could have given me the official line and sent me home." You didn't. You pulled me into that hallway, and you told me exactly how the machine worked and exactly why it was broken, and you did it knowing it could cost you. I held his gaze. And 3 weeks ago, you called me from a corner of your department to tell me federal agents had arrived. That matters. Miller's jaw was still working. His eyes were very bright. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, a gesture of suppression of a man who has decided he is not going to cry on a sidewalk in front of someone he respects. And then he dropped his hand and cleared his throat hard. "It's not enough," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's not enough, but it's what you had, and you used it." He nodded once tight and jerky, the nod of a man who is not ready to be forgiven, but is willing to hear that the account is not entirely empty. My phone buzzed. Marcus. 1 minute, I told Miller. I stepped aside and answered. "Elias Thornton's attorney just submitted the proffer paperwork to DOJ, Marcus said. He's going to give them Beatrice and Caleb, the racketeering structure, the money laundering chain, the contract fraud, all of it in exchange for a cooperation agreement." "Does he know about Sarah's phone?" I said. "No," Marcus said. "If he knew, he would have disappeared, not lawyered up." A pause. "But Arthur, the proffer doesn't guarantee him anything. DOJ can still charge him on everything if the evidence supports it. And if Sarah has what we think she has it," I said. "I know she has it." "Then it doesn't matter what Elias offers," Marcus said quietly, "because his own voice is going to be the thing that ends him." I looked back at Miller, who was standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets, staring at the federal vehicles 2 blocks away with the expression of a man watching something he waited a long time to see. "Marcus," I said, "I need to go to the hospital." Marcus called me the next morning at 9:14 while I was sitting in the hospital parking lot, not yet ready to go inside. I had driven up to Atlanta the previous evening, not to see Sarah, though I had stopped in to check on her, to hold her hand for 20 minutes and watch the monitors trace their slow, steady lines and tell myself that steady was enough for now. I had driven up because I needed to be closer to the machine that was moving, even if I was not part of its moving. I was on my second cup of gas station coffee when the phone rang. "You need to hear this," Marcus said. His voice had the quality of a man who has just watched something extraordinary happen and is still deciding how to describe it. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" "Parking lot," I said. "Talk." He talked for 11 minutes. I did not interrupt him once. What happened inside the DOJ negotiation rooms over the previous 48 hours, Marcus had learned through Whitmore, who had been present for parts of it, and had been briefed on the rest. I was not there. I will never have a complete picture of it. Only the outline, only the shape of what happened as it was described to me, second and third hand. But the outline was enough. Elias Thornton had walked into the DOJ negotiation with his personal attorney and a leather-bound ledger he had maintained since 1987. The ledger contained 35 years of handwritten records, names, dates, amounts, services rendered, every judge he had paid, every official he had cultivated, every favor extended and collected. He had kept it the way a certain kind of man keeps records, not from conscience, but from a need for control, for the comfort of knowing that every transaction was documented, and therefore every person he had paid was in some permanent way his. He had offered it as the centerpiece of his cooperation. In exchange, he wanted full immunity on the racketeering charges and a reduced exposure on the money laundering counts. Essentially, he wanted to hand his wife and his son to the federal government and walk away with his freedom, more or less intact. "He sat in that room," Marcus said, "and he gave them Beatrice first. The Dorothy Morgan Foundation transfers the Piedmont Trust structure, the DEA-flagged account. He laid it all out, and he told them Beatrice had built it. Beatrice had managed it. Beatrice had been the architect of the financial concealment." A pause. "Then he gave them Caleb, the Cypress Heights contracts, the fake bid structure, the deed of trust he had pressured Sarah into signing." I was gripping the coffee cup so hard the plastic was beginning to give. "And Beatrice?" I said. Beatrice's attorney submitted a counterproffer 4 hours later. Marcus's voice was very dry. "She gave them Elias, complete chain of command, documentation, emails, text messages she had saved, going back 9 years, showing Elias had originated, approved, and directed every element of the financial scheme." He paused. "She also gave them something Elias had not offered. She confirmed that the pressure campaign on Sarah, the systematic effort to keep her from speaking, had been initiated and supervised by Elias himself." My jaw ached from the pressure I was putting on it. "And Caleb," I said. "Caleb's attorney made contact with the DOJ at 7 this morning," Marcus said. "He lasted about 36 hours before he folded completely. He gave them the full command structure, every instruction from Elias, every approval chain, every communication between himself and his father regarding the land contracts and the financial arrangements. Another pause. He also confirmed the timeline on Sarah's house. Who gave the order? Who was present? Who knew? The parking lot was quiet around me. 2 floors above Sarah was lying in a hospital bed, with monitors tracing her steady lines moving in the right direction. I thought about what Marcus was describing. 3 people in 3 separate rooms, each of them feeding the others to the machine, each of them calculating that their own survival required someone else's destruction. A family that had operated for 30 years as a single organism, controlling, absorbing, consolidating, reduced in 48 hours to 3 individuals pointing at each other across conference tables. Marcus, I said, Elias's proffer, does it hold? Does he get the immunity he's asking for? A pause. That's the thing, Marcus said. DOJ hasn't accepted it. The proffer gives them useful corroboration on the financial structure, but it doesn't give them the direct command evidence on Sarah. Without that, there's an argument, a weak one, but an argument that Elias directed the financial scheme without direct involvement in what happened to her specifically. His voice went careful. If that argument gets traction, Arthur, he could negotiate his way to a significantly reduced exposure. I looked up through the windshield at the hospital facade. He won't, I said. Arthur, he won't get that deal, I said. Because Sarah is going to wake up, and when she wakes up, she's going to give us something that makes his proffer completely worthless. I set the empty coffee cup on the dashboard. I taught her Marcus. Years ago before the wedding, I sat her down, and I told her, if you're ever in a situation where someone has power over you, and you can't get out, the most important thing you can do is document it. Keep records, and if you're ever in real danger, always keep the cloud recording running. A long pause on the line. You think she did, Marcus said. I think she is her father's daughter, I said. And her mother's too. Dorothy kept records of everything. Every receipt, every letter, every conversation that mattered. Sarah grew up watching that. It's not something you teach, it's something you absorb. My throat tightened. She's been lying in that bed for weeks, and the thing I keep thinking about, the thing I cannot stop thinking about, is that she knew. Before any of this started, some part of her knew, and she prepared. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower and more careful than usual. Chloe called me yesterday, he said. She finished the final version of the financial cross-reference. 112 data points, all sourced, all time-stamped. He paused. She said to tell you that she's ready. Whatever happens next, she's ready. I thought about Chloe at that corner table in the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a cup, 14 months of anger, compressed into a spreadsheet that could tell the story of corruption to anyone who knew how to read it. I thought about Dr. Mercer in her locked office, her hands trembling on the desk, but her voice steady. I thought about Elena, on a highway heading north, a cracked phone in her coat pocket, finally moving towards something instead of away from it. I thought about the people who build the thing that takes the wall down. How rarely they get to see it fall. How often the work is done in small rooms with legal pads and cold coffee, and the falling happens somewhere else in rooms you are not allowed to enter, witnessed by people you will never meet. Tell Chloe thank you, I said. Tell her it mattered. Every piece of it mattered. I got out of the car. The December air was cold and thin, the kind of cold that makes you feel the edges of your own face. I stood in the parking lot for a moment and looked up at the hospital windows 2 floors up. Third from the left, the room where Sarah was moving in the right direction. And I felt something shift inside me that was not hope exactly and was not certainty exactly, but was somewhere between the two, in the place where people go, when they have done everything they can do, and the rest is no longer in their hands. Then I went inside. I need you to stay with me for just a little longer, before I reveal what Sarah had hidden under that pillow for weeks. Comment ready below. Let me know you're in this with me. A reminder, some details here are fictional, crafted to serve the story's purpose, rather than the historical record. If this isn't the content you're looking for, it's okay to step away. I'll be here when you come back. The nurse at the second-floor station looked up when I came through the stairwell door, and something in her expression changed before she said a word. A quickening, a brightness. The particular look of someone who has been waiting to deliver good news to a specific person and has been watching the door for them. Mr. Morgan, she said, and she was already standing. She's been asking for you. My hand found the wall beside me. I pressed my palm flat against it and stood there for a moment, just breathing, while those 4 words rearranged everything inside my chest. She's been asking for you. Since when? I said. My voice came out strange, too high, not quite mine. About an hour ago. the nurse said. Her name was Patricia. I knew that by now I had spoken to her every morning for weeks. Her eyes were bright and kind. She woke up slowly. She was confused at first, which is normal after the concussion and the time she's been under. But she's been oriented for about 40 minutes now, and the first thing she said when she understood where she was, Patricia stopped, pressed her lips together. Her own eyes had gone shiny. She said, "I need my dad. Can someone call my dad?" I pushed off the wall and walked down the hallway. The room was the same room it had always been. Same monitors, same chrome pole, same window with the parking lot view. But the figure in the bed was different. She was sitting up, slightly carefully propped against pillows, her left arm still bandaged and her face still carrying the fading yellow-green of old bruising. But her eyes were open. Her eyes were open, and they found me the moment I came through the door, and they did not let go. "Dad," she said. It was one word. It should not have been enough to do what it did to me. But it came out of her in a voice that was hoarse from weeks of disuse and rough at the edges, and absolutely unmistakably hers, and it hit me somewhere below the sternum with the force of something I had been holding back for so long that the holding back had become invisible to me. I had forgotten I was doing it until the moment I stopped. I crossed the room in 4 steps, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I put my arms around my daughter very carefully, mindful of the bandages and the IV line, and every place that was still healing, and she put her good arm around my neck and held on, and I put my face against her hair, and I let myself cry. Not quietly. Not the contained, managed thing I had been doing in parking lots and kitchens and the fronts of cars. Actually, cry my shoulders, shaking my breath, coming in pieces. Everything that had been locked behind 35 years of audit discipline and 5 years of widowhood and 6 weeks of building a case on a legal pad, suddenly finding the door open and going through it all at once. Sarah was crying too. I could feel it, her chest shaking against mine, her fingers tightening in my shirt, her voice coming out muffled against my shoulder, saying, "Dad, Dad, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have called you," and I kept saying, No, you don't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. Hold on, just hold on." We stayed like that for a long time. When we finally separated, we were both wrecked, red-eyed, and raw, and not remotely embarrassed about it. Patricia had slipped out at some point and pulled the door most of the way closed behind her, which I was grateful for. Sarah looked at me. She reached up with her good hand and touched my face just briefly the way she had touched my face when she was 4 years old, and wanted to make sure I was paying attention. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. "Most of it," I said. She nodded slowly. Her eyes were very clear. Whatever the concussion had taken from her, temporarily, it had given back. She was entirely herself, entirely present, and I could see behind her eyes the particular quality of someone who has been lying in a bed for weeks with nothing to do but think, and has arrived at a place of clarity that is almost peaceful. "There's something I need to give you," she said. She reached beneath her pillow, a movement so deliberate, so practiced, that it was obvious she had done it many times in her mind before she did it with her hands, and she drew out a phone. Small, older model, the screen dark. She held it out to me. I took it. The night it happened, she said, her voice dropping, going careful and precise in the way of someone describing something they have rehearsed. "Before Caleb came home, I heard them on the phone downstairs, him and his father. I could hear Elias's voice through the floor. And I remembered what you told me." She looked at me steadily. "Before the wedding. You sat me down and you said, Sarah, if you were ever in a situation where someone has power over you and you cannot get out, document everything. And if you are ever in real danger, always keep the cloud recording running," I said. "Always keep the cloud recording running," she repeated. Her chin was trembling, but her voice did not waver. I went to the kitchen. I set the phone on the counter with the screen face down. I pressed the record. And then I went back upstairs and I waited. My hands were shaking around the phone. I looked down at it, this small, ordinary object, a 5-year-old handset, with a cracked corner on the case, and I understood what it had cost her to hold on to it, to hide it, to lie in a hospital bed for weeks drifting in and out of consciousness and keep it safe under her pillow, because some part of her, even when she couldn't form words, had known it mattered. "Sarah," I said, and my voice broke on her name. "How long have you been keeping this?" "Since the week before it happened," she said. "I started recording things 3 weeks before. Dad, I knew it was getting worse. I didn't know how bad it was going to get, but I knew it was getting worse, and I thought..." Her voice caught. She pressed her lips together, hard-breathed through her nose, steadied herself. "I thought if something happened to me, I wanted there to be something. I wanted there to be a record, because I know what you always say. Numbers don't lie, I said. Numbers don't lie, she said. And neither do recordings. I opened the audio files. There were 11 of them. I pressed play on the most recent dated the night she was admitted. The recording quality was imperfect, the ambient noise of a kitchen footsteps, the distant sound of a door, and then voices. Two voices, one through a phone speaker, older, authoritative, accustomed to being obeyed, and one in the room. Elias Thornton's voice came through the small speaker, clearly enough that the words were unmistakable. Take care of it tonight, Caleb. I've already spoken to the department. No one is going to ask questions we don't want asked. Do you understand me? And Caleb's voice flat and acquiescent, the voice of a man who had stopped making his own decisions a long time ago. I understand. I stopped the recording. The room was very quiet. I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed with a small phone in my shaking hands, and I looked at the dark screen, and I thought about Elias Thornton in a DOJ negotiation room, trying to construct an argument that the financial crimes were someone else's responsibility, that he had not directed what had happened to Sarah, specifically that there was enough distance between himself and this room to build a defense. There was not enough distance. There had never been enough distance. His own voice had made sure of that. "Dad," Sarah said. I looked up. Her eyes were full brimming, holding the way eyes hold before they let go, and her chin was still trembling, but she was looking at me with an expression that was not just grief, not just relief. It was something older and quieter, the expression of a person who did a hard thing in a dark moment and held on to it long enough to hand it to someone who could use it. "You told me to keep it running," she said. I kept it running. I reached out and took her hand, the unbandaged one, the right one, and held it in both of mine. "I know," I said. My voice was barely a voice. "I know you did." I called Marcus from the hallway 2 minutes later. "Marcus," I said, "tell Agent Whitmore that Elias Thornton's proffer agreement is finished. We have his voice giving the direct order." I leaned against the wall, the phone still warm from Sarah's hiding place, pressed against my chest with my free hand. "It's over." A pause, then Marcus very quietly, "Good," he said. "Arthur, that's very good. It took 14 months. I want to say that simply without dressing it up, because the number matters. 14 months from the morning, the federal agents walked into the Cypress County Commissioner's office with banker's boxes and tamper-evident seals, to the morning I put on my one good suit and drove to Atlanta. 14 months of Sarah's recovery, the cast coming off in stages, the physical therapy twice a week, the sessions with the counselor in Decatur, who had a quiet office and a waiting room with good light, and who Sarah said after the third visit was the first person who had ever asked her the right questions. 14 months of legal proceedings that moved at the speed of federal bureaucracy, which is to say, slowly and then all at once. 14 months of Chloe Reed rebuilding her career of Dr. Mercer, continuing to practice at Cypress General after the Georgia Medical Board had reviewed the evidence and formally dismissed the complaint against her license of Elena Vasquez, beginning a new life in Nashville with the help of the advocacy organization Marcus had connected her to. 14 months. And then, a Tuesday morning in February, the sky over Atlanta flat and white, and I was parking in a federal courthouse garage, and my hands were steady, and the legal pad on the passenger seat had a single line written at the top of a fresh page today. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. I had spent a career in government buildings, knew their particular combination of marble and fluorescent light, their way of making ordinary human transactions feel simultaneously important and bureaucratic. The federal courtroom on the 4th floor of the Richard B. Russell Building was no different. Wood paneling, rows of gallery seats, an elevated bench behind which, at 9:03 a.m., Judge Patricia Holloway took her seat. She was a compact woman in her late 50s with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and she had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have sat at the center of difficult situations for a long time and have learned that stillness is a form of authority. She arranged her papers without hurry. She looked at the room without performance. When her eyes moved across the gallery, they did it with the steady sweep of someone taking an accurate inventory. Sarah was beside me. She had come to every procedural hearing over the 14 months quietly without announcement, sitting in gallery rows, and watching the machinery of federal prosecution move through its stages. Today she was wearing a dark blue coat, and her hair was down, and her hands were folded in her lap, and she was sitting very straight the way she sits when she is holding something difficult with conscious deliberateness. Marcus was on my other side in his good jacket, his hands folded on his knee, watching the front of the room with the focused patience of a man who has waited for things before and knows that the waiting is part of the work. 2 rows behind us, I knew without looking, was Reverend Thomas Okafor. He had driven up from Cypress County the night before, called me at 7 p.m. to say he was coming, that he had sat with this for 11 years, and he intended to sit with the end of it too. When I had turned around before the proceedings began, he had caught my eye, and nodded once the same nod he had given me across a hospital waiting room 14 months ago, but with something different in it now, something that was close to resolved. And in the second row to our left, Chloe Reed, dressed sharply, chin up her laptop bag on the floor beside her feet. She had stopped carrying it everywhere about 6 months ago when she had accepted the position at the cybersecurity firm in Atlanta. But today she had brought it out of habit, or perhaps out of memory. When I had looked at her before the proceedings, she had given me a tight, fierce smile that said everything words would have taken too long to say. The plea hearings proceeded in sequence. Federal plea proceedings under Rule 11 require the judge to personally address each defendant, confirm their understanding of the charges and consequences, and satisfy herself that the plea is voluntary and that a factual basis exists for the guilty finding. Judge Holloway conducted each one with the same patient thoroughness, no shortcuts, no ceremony, just the careful work of a system, making sure it was doing what it was supposed to do. Caleb came first. He was thinner than I remembered from the hospital waiting room, the easy good looks worn down by 14 months of legal process, and the particular erosion that comes from watching your own family testify against you. He stood at the defense table in a charcoal suit and answered Judge Holloway's questions in a voice that was flat and compliant, and when she asked him to confirm the factual basis of his plea, the contract fraud, the financial manipulation, the pressure campaign against Sarah, he said yes to each count in a voice that had no argument left in it. Beatrice came second. She was smaller than I had imagined. I had built her up in my mind from Elena's recordings, from the clipped authority of her voice giving instructions, and the physical reality of her was somehow diminished by the courtroom's scale. She stood very straight and she spoke clearly, and she showed no emotion that I could detect, which told me more about her than grief would have. Elias came last. He walked to the defense table with the careful, deliberate gait of a man who has decided that dignity is the last thing he has left and is determined to maintain it. He was in his late 60s now, silver-haired, still carrying the physical ease of a man accustomed to rooms deferring to him. But the room was not deferring. The room was a federal courtroom, and the woman at the bench had never been to his Christmas party and had no pension fund he could touch, and I watched him understand that in real time as he stood before her. And it was, I will admit, something to see. Judge Holloway addressed him directly. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "you are before this court to enter a guilty plea to the following federal charges." She read them: racketeering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to tamper with a witness. That last one, conspiracy to tamper with a witness, covered what had been done to Sarah. It was not the charge I would have written if I were writing charges. It was a legal category, a classification, a box that the law had found to put around something that had no adequate box. But it was something. It was the system saying, in the only language it had, this happened, it was wrong, and it has a name. Judge Holloway asked Elias if he understood the charges. "Yes," he said. She asked if his plea was voluntary. "Yes," he said. She asked him to confirm the factual basis. She went through it point by point: the financial scheme, the obstruction of investigations, the direction of the pressure campaign against Sarah Morgan Thornton. There was a pause before he answered the last one. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. I counted. "Yes," he said. Judge Holloway looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her papers. Then she accepted the plea. I did not make a sound. I did not move. I sat in my gallery seat with my hands folded on the legal pad in my lap, and I looked at the front of the room, and I breathed one breath, 2, 3, while the proceedings continued around me, the attorneys conferring, the court reporter's fingers moving the machinery of conclusion, doing its work. Sarah reached over and put her hand on mine. I turned and looked at her. Her eyes were wet, not spilling, just full the way eyes go when they are holding more than they were built to hold. She did not say anything. She just kept her hand on mine and looked at me, and I looked back at her, and we sat like that, while the room around us finished its business. Behind us, I heard Reverend Okafor exhale long and slow and deep, the exhale of a man setting down something he has been carrying for 11 years. It was the loudest sound in the room. When the proceedings ended and the courtroom began to empty, I stayed in my seat for a moment longer. I opened the legal pad to the single line I had written that morning. Today. I drew a straight line through it, the line of an auditor closing an account, not angry, not celebratory, just final, just done. Then I stood up and I turned around, and Reverend Okafor was there, with his hand extended, his eyes very bright, and Marcus was there, and Chloe was there, with her fierce, tight smile gone wide and real. Now she was actually laughing quietly, with her hand pressed over her mouth, laughing the way people laugh when the relief is too large for any other expression. And Sarah was beside me with her arm linked through mine. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home, Dad." A year after the plea hearings, on an evening in late July, when the Georgia heat had finally broken and the air coming through the kitchen screen door smelled like cut grass and cooling earth, I sat on the front porch of my house and did not do anything at all. I want to say that plainly because it was not as simple as it sounds. I had not done nothing, truly nothing, without a legal pad, without a pencil, without something to read or review or follow to its source in longer than I could accurately calculate. The habit of work is the deepest habit I have, deeper than sleep, deeper than hunger. Dorothy used to say that I would audit the grocery list if she left me alone long enough, and she was not entirely wrong. But tonight there was no legal pad. There was a glass of iced tea going warm on the porch railing, and the oak tree in the yard moving in the evening wind, and Sarah sitting in the other chair with a paperback and her feet tucked up under her. That was everything. That was all of it. Marcus had left an hour ago. He had driven up from Atlanta for the afternoon, which was becoming a habit, a good one, the kind that forms when two people realize they have been acquaintances their whole lives and have only recently figured out how to be friends. He had brought tomatoes from his garden, which he grew with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, and we had eaten on the porch and talked about things that had nothing to do with evidence packages or federal proceedings or the machinery of consequence. We talked about his grandson who was learning to walk. We talked about a book I had been meaning to read for 3 years. We talked about Dorothy, which we did more often now, not painfully, but the way you talk about someone who was real and mattered and is still part of the conversation, even when they are not in the room. The news from everyone was good. Elena had found work at a nonprofit in Nashville, helping immigrant families with housing navigation. She had sent a handwritten card 3 weeks ago, careful English, the kind earned through years of deliberate effort, with a photograph of a cardinal sitting on a fence post in the snow. I had put it on the refrigerator next to Dorothy's photograph, which felt exactly right. Chloe had texted 3 days ago, promoted, senior analyst, thought you should know. I had called her immediately and she had laughed the way she had laughed in the federal courthouse relief, too large for any other expression, and we had talked for 40 minutes about everything except Cypress County, which was, I thought, exactly the right amount of time to spend on that subject. Dr. Mercer had driven up 2 months ago for dinner. She had arrived with a bottle of Georgia wine she had researched specifically for the occasion and stayed until nearly 11, which was later than either Sarah or I had expected. She was, it turned out, genuinely funny, dry, and observational, the humor of someone who has spent a career watching human beings at their most vulnerable and developed laughter as a survival mechanism. We had made plans to do it again in the fall. Reverend Okafor had called last week. Cypress County, he said, was breathing differently. A new commissioner named Diane Carr had won a special election in March on a transparency platform, and in her first 2 months in office had commissioned an independent audit of every county contract awarded in the previous decade. When he told me that last part, I had to set the phone down for a moment and collect myself, which Okafor had apparently found entertaining. "Arthur," he had said when I picked the phone back up, "the Lord has a sense of humor." "He does," I had said. "He really does." Sarah looked up from her book. "You're staring at the tree again." "I'm not staring," I said. "I'm observing." "That's what you always say." She closed the book, keeping her thumb in her page. Her face had healed completely, no trace of the bruising. No evidence of the stitches, just her face, the one I had known her entire life. The one that looked like Dorothy around the eyes, and like me around the jaw, which Dorothy had always said was unfortunate for Sarah, and I had always taken as a compliment. "What are you observing?" "That the tree needs pruning on the lower left branch," I said. "And that your mother planted it 30 years ago in mud with you helping, and you mostly just got dirt on yourself and asked questions." Sarah was quiet for a moment. The porch light was on, and the yard beyond it was going dark, the fireflies starting their slow work in the lower branches of the oak. "She would have liked today," Sarah said, not asking, stating the way you state something you have been turning over long enough to be certain of it. "She would have liked today," I agreed. "She would have said I took too long." Sarah smiled, slow and real, the smile that had been coming back in stages over 14 months, each stage a little easier than the last. She would have been right. She usually was. I got up from the porch chair, went inside, and came back with the last legal pad from the box above the refrigerator. I sat down, opened it to the first page, and looked at the single word written there in my own handwriting from the morning I had decided to start. Thornton. I looked at it for a long time. Then I picked up a pencil. I drew a single straight line through the name, unhurried, level, the line of a man closing an account that has been fully settled. I closed the legal pad and set it on the porch railing. I thought about Dorothy. Not as the absence of her, not as the shape her leaving had cut in everything, but as herself. The woman who crouched in the mud in her good jeans explaining root systems to a 2-year-old. The woman who told me 20 years ago that you don't fight fires with your fists, you find where they started. The woman whose name had been borrowed by people who understood nothing about what it meant and whose borrowing had, in the end, only helped bring them down. Dorothy, I said quietly to the oak tree in the yard and the July evening. The books are balanced. I thought you should know. Sarah reached over and put her hand on my arm. I put my hand over hers. We sat together in the July evening, father and daughter, and let the quiet be quiet, not empty quiet, not the quiet of things unsaid, but the full quiet of a thing completed of an account, closed of a weight set down after a long carrying. A firefly lifted out of the lower branches of the oak tree and hung in the air for a moment, very bright, before it went out. I looked at it. I thought of Dorothy. I smiled. My name is Arthur Morgan, and this is the family story I never wanted to have. I was a man who spent 35 years reading numbers for the state of Georgia, and when the worst happened to my own family, the only thing that saved us was patience. Not rage, not confrontation. Patience and the willingness to follow the truth wherever it went. Here is what I want to say to you directly. Do not wait the way I waited. If someone you love is in danger, do not tell yourself the system will handle it. Sometimes the system belongs to the wrong people. Sometimes the only person who can act is you, quietly, carefully, with everything you have. I am not a religious man by habit, but I believe God places the right people in the right rooms at the right moments. A doctor who chose ethics over safety, a young woman who kept a cracked phone in her coat pocket, an old soldier who still had one working channel to Washington. This family betrayal nearly destroyed us. What rebuilt us was the people who refused to look away. Every family story has a moment where someone chooses to act or chooses to be silent. I chose to act. It was the only thing left worth choosing. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever watched family betrayal poison the people you love, tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe quiet strength matters, subscribe. We tell stories like this one every week. Thank you for staying until the very end.